All right, hi there. We're going to be looking at the circular flow diagram. It's a diagram that looks at economic activity and shows the flow of certain aspects throughout the economy and also highlights how households and firms interact with each other. Now in this diagram there are two markets, the markets for goods and services and the markets for factors of production. And then also in this diagram are pathways that are flowing in opposite directions. On one of those pathways are spending, revenue, wages, rent, and profit, and income. On the other pathway are land, labor, capital, human capital, factors of production, goods and services sold, and goods and services bought. Now again, these interact by going through households to markets and goods and services, to firms, to markets or factors of production, and then back to households, and vice versa for all these aspects. Next, we'll be taking a look more of a deeper dive into the markets for goods and services.
So I'll be talking about the market for goods and services, which is this top half here. This is where all the goods and services that are produced by firms are purchased and then consumed by the households. So what does this include? So the market for goods and services includes the firms, which are over there. They produce the goods and services, and then the households on this side, which consume the goods and services. The firms are the producers of goods and services for the households to end up purchasing, and then in turn the households are the consumers of the goods and services purchased from the firms. This would mean that the flow of money is going in the opposite direction compared to the goods and services. So households purchase the goods and services that are produced by the firms, and the firms produce goods and services for households to buy. This means that the flow of goods and services goes from the firms to the households. So this is the red line here, goods and services sold, and then the bought to the households. And the flow of money goes from the households to the firms. So this green line up here, spending and then revenue to the firms. Here's an example. So Apple produces iPhones for people to buy. A customer walks into the Apple store to buy an iPhone. Apple, which is the firm, sells the iPhone to the customer who just walked in, who is the consumer or the household. The finished product, which is the iPhone, flows from the firm to the consumer, following that red line there. And the household needs to pay for the good it has received. So the money flows from the household to the firm, which is that green line right over there. Thus, Apple receives money for producing the iPhone to the consumer, and the customer receives the iPhone for providing money to Apple.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the factors of production. The factors of production are all of the inputs that we need to create a good or service to gain economic profit. This is going to include the labor, land, capital, as well as entrepreneurship. So firms produce the goods and services which are consumed by households, but households are also providing these firms with land, labor, and capital in order to ensure that these firms can produce these products for consumption. There's a couple key points to take away regarding the factors of production. One of them being that technological advancements or lack thereof can influence the factors of production in terms of efficiency. Another point to take away is that land is a determining factor of production for things such as farming, but it can also be changed into something else, which is known as the mobility of land. Geographically, land is not mobile, but its purpose can be changed, so it can go from farming to housing, not quickly, but it can. And also determine if something is a consumer good or capital by looking at its usage, which is super important. So computers, for instance, a company could be using them for things such as taxes or their daily go-abouts, but in that case it would be capital. But if someone's just using the computer for something such as gaming, then it's considered a consumer good.
Here is our basic circular flow diagram, which can be seen as a very simple visual representation of the economy and the flow of dollars. Looking at this model, let's start with the households, which provide the land, labor, and human capital through the market for factors of production to the firms. The firms then use those factors of production to create the goods and services that are now going to be sold through the markets for goods and services back to the households for them to consume. This is how the flow of inputs and outputs interact in the market, and those are going to be the red lines right here. Now let's see how the money moves to this model, starting with the firms. The firms pay the wages, rent, and profit to the households for their supply of the factors of production and the markets for factors of production. Households take that income from the firms and use it to purchase goods and services which are produced by the firms in the market for goods and services. This money that households spend provides revenue for the firm's production of goods and services, and then is used to invest back into those factors of production that households provide. This is how the flow happens in circular flow diagram. Here's some questions to practice what we've learned so far. Number 1, who earns money and spends their income on goods and services? What do you think?
So the answer to this one is C, households. Households are working for these firms and businesses, and they're taking their income that they get and spending it back on goods and services and putting it back out into the market.
All right, now moving on to the second question. What is the role of firms in the circular flow of the income?
The answer to the question is B. So firms produce goods and then in turn for households to purchase.
And the final question is, what does the circular flow model show us? Any ideas?
The answer for this question is D, flow of expenditures plus incomes in the economy. And this can be looked at in both ways in terms of the pathways. And the one green way is showing the flow of money. Again, the households are earning the income, spending it in the market for goods and services, which is then going back to the firms, which they use then for paying the households in the factors of production, and that income goes back to the households. And it goes opposite again. You can think of income as even being the land capital, human capital that flows into the market for factors of production, which then flows into the firms, which then the firms produce the goods and services, which go into the market for goods and services, which then of course is bought by the households, and then the households bought those goods, and they send the land capital and human capital back into the factors. Again, income is not just money. You can look at it as human capital and also the flow of goods and services.